Welcome to the Chapter 416 podcast, where strategy meets storytelling. At some point, we'll be in the middle of talking about deployment, and then we will wean off and talk about some arbitrary person that we met and some awesome times. My name is Pajama Pants. That's Brad Chester.
This guy.
And I'm really excited again to be back with you, Brad, talking about 40K, getting more and more pumped. And what's got me pumped right now is Adepticon, number one. And number two, the thing I would like to talk about today, the Eldar Codex, and
Pointy
how
ears.
excited I am.
Woo!
So you
I'm
must be
super
jazzed.
favorite faction. I've always liked Eldar because I thought it's always been a very high skill list where you get rewarded for excellent play. Movement is the key to this game, and Eldar does it the best. And they are super fragile, so when you make mistakes, you get punished for them, but you get rewarded for your good plays. At the beginning of 10th, I thought Eldar played the least like Eldar's ever been, the least Eldari of Eldar. No
Yeah,
sense.
actually, I felt like when 10th came out, Orcs played a lot like Eldar.
Yeah,
Because I've
way more
evaluated
than Eldar did.
Yeah, I've always evaluated Eldar as the toolbox army. You kind of have an answer to a lot of things. You don't necessarily, historically, you don't see that spam be the most efficient way to play Eldar. Yeah, I know there was a time where people had 18 shining spears and they had all the stratagems where they can move and still run and charge and all that stuff. But historic Eldar, for as long as we've been playing, has been a very balanced army. I got my striking scorpions here, my howling banshees in a wave serpent. I got my falcon in the back. I got a fire prism on the side, some hornets kind of pushing up the flank, rangers on the sidelines, warp spiders kind of going into my deployment zone. It was a lot of
100%.
your favorite thing, trash.
I
Except
love
none of it's
it.
trash in Eldar. That's
Exactly.
the
But
craziest thing.
the best thing about this is I was drawn into the Eldar army early on by Aspect Warriors, Phoenix Lords, and Psychers and stuff. I just think that you can play that type of Eldar again, and it's rewarded for it. I think the new battle focus mechanic is fantastic. Effectively, you get 4 tokens. This is their army. They're not the attachment rule, but their army rule. You get 4 tokens. You can't do any of them twice except for move +2.
Yep.
So you've got move +2, which you can do on different units, just adds to the movement. You've got can't do Overwatch, which is huge for an army with T3 1 wound models.
Yeah,
Things like
fantastic.
fire, you just go, okay, cool, I don't want to be shot in Overwatch. And it works until the end of the turn. So you basically declare that they can't shoot you when you're moving, they can't shoot you when you're charging and stuff. One of the biggest ones is D6+1 to your vehicle. So you can zoom that vehicle, then get guys out 3 inches, then shoot, and then they've got, excuse me, a 6-inch consolidation. They've got a reactive move if somebody falls back from you. So you charge in with those striking scorpions and you kill something and you're consolidated in something, and they want to fall back and then shoot you. You've got, for one of your tokens, you've got a D6+1 reactive move. So all of a sudden you can flip behind a wall.
Yeah.
It's just
Basically
really,
I think what you're articulating right now, and I know we're not going to ever be a podcast that opens a codex and reads it to people. In fact, I hope all of you read your own codex. I know that a lot of people like to get their information from a podcast, maybe on the car, listening to someone physically read you a book. That's not going to be us. But the Eldar have gone back to that toolbox approach. You laid out a bunch of stuff, right? You said there's ways to turn off Overwatch. There's ways to get vehicles to move farther and still get out of the vehicle to shoot.
infantry.
There's ways to get back in a vehicle if you want to.
2 different attachments, and they did it right too, because it's at the end of the fight phase. So like you go and you pop back in, and autarchs now have basically captain abilities where they can make a stratagem -1. This is only a 1 CP stratagem, so for free, and you can attach them. You get those 4 tokens, and they regen every turn. So it's basically almost having free CP because you do those battle focus. And then you have something like an autarch join a unit of fire dragons, which you can join now. He shoots with the fire dragon because he can have a fusion gun too, dragon fusion gun.
Yeah.
And at the end of the fight phase, for 0 CP, because he makes it -1, they backflip back into the wave serpent. You're like, deuces, chumps. When I did it today, I'm very excited about it. I played a practice game, got out, 10-man fire dragon with Fugan. Fire dragons now are like eradicators. They reroll all hits, wounds, and damage to monsters and vehicles. And the aspect host has two super cool stratagems, and I really love it. Aspect warrior is my favorite. One, they have a great stratagem that basically gives you preternatural precision. You can either do lethal hits, sustain hits, or ignore cover. You basically get a token. And if you're 5 man, you get one token. If you're 10 man, you get two tokens. And you can either use it to make an auto 6 of a hit or a wound, or you can use your stratagem, say, you can pick one thing, or if you use a token, you can pick two things. So you
Yeah.
can pop those fire dragons out with full rerolls and get lethals and sustained. You can split fire because you're just going to get so much devastation with that. And they've got a great thing. Warrior focus. You ignore all to hit, all ballistic skill, all weapon skill modifiers that can be used in the shooting or the fight phase. And you also ignore damage modifier characteristics. So that dreadnought that was -1 damage, or a
C-Tans.
Catan that's you're like, hey man, how about instead you take full damage? Pew pew.
Yeah, it's really it feels like an army that could really address a lot of different things. It could get to the table and you just basically say, "Oh, who am I playing? What is their, path
You
to
have toolbox. It
victory?"
feels very
And I'm
you're
very much gonna be able to know what units are gonna be critical this game and what units are not. It's gonna be very common, I think, for an Eldar player who goes 5-0 at a GT to consider a different unit the MVP of every round,
100%. And the thing
which is
is
crazy.
I'm debating on one or two wave serpents because you can really do all those backflips into it, but also you can, uh,
Yeah.
in the
Yeah, you can get a unit out that you're willing to let go, like they've
right,
done their
and then
job, and then get
and
someone else back in at
I
the end of the fight
really
phase.
I love the Phoenix Lords, I love the Asp Chorus, and I think they really did them justice. They're not OP, but they're just good. They're very good units. Like Banshees have fights first, Banshees can advance and charge. Jane Czar says, "Hey, how about instead of rolling that dice, you just auto make it a 6 every time you advance?"
Yeah,
Boom, you're jumping out in
like a miracle
Overwatch.
dice. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's just you can do all these little things where it feels like you can utility go in. They've got so much movement.
Because they have so many options and so many avenues to play them, what would you say their strengths are going to be in terms of a community standpoint? Are you thinking this is going to be a top tier Eldar army concept, or do you think the mid players will be able to resonate real well with Eldar? Or are you expecting those advanced players who know when to use things, when not to use things, when to commit, when not to commit? And even though Eldar have the most movement I think I've ever seen in 40K since third edition Blood Angels Rush, I still think that you're going to have to make the right decisions with this army.
100%. The wheels can still fall off. I think it's going to have a very high ceiling, but it's going to have a lower floor. Now, there's some other detachments that I feel are a lot easier to play, like the Windrider Host. You basically slap bikes with warlocks. They ignore cover. They reroll all hits on the closest target, and they can uppy downy 2 units a turn, so you can bounce things around. It's going to be a very good. Don't get me wrong. It's not like it's the easiest thing ever, but it's much easier, I think, to play than really trying to nickel and dime where your aspect hosts need to go. And you can
Mhm.
still play some of those harder hitting units like dragons and everything else. You basically bikes become battle line and you can pick things up. You know what I mean? I think that's going to be the safer way to play because you can just put down things like warwalkers. Warwalkers are really nice.
Yeah,
They're, hey, you hit something, cool. Extra AP for everything that shoots that same thing. So you
yep.
take shuriken cannon bikes, they're AP1. Now they're AP2, and you've got a strat to make them another AP. You're re-rolling all hits. It's
You're just putting wounds on stuff.
100%.
Yeah.
And you're just like, hey, take a save at your invuln or 2 damage. Boom, boom, boom. I think that's going to be a popular way to play because I think also like people that have had Eldar in the past have a lot of jet bikes and stuff because
You think in some early lists could be like 3 units of jet bikes, 3 units of shining spears, 3 war walkers,
I think units of jet bikes. They
6
become
units of jet
battle line.
bikes. Yeah, that's true. You could take 6.
They
Yeah.
can just
Take
bounce up
6
and down.
battle
You
ones.
just
Yeah,
fucking
that's
run
bouncing. Yeah.
around. And that
Just
that
move.
it could be a team army. You know what I mean? Because it's like that. You basically have so many guns that you can take care of something. It's
For
like,
pairings, yeah, people have a
yeah.
hard time with
But I
pairings.
think the aspect list is going to be the more high, like I said, high skill cap. You're going to have people that are going to have a harder time with it. I think the win rate's going to be much lower than the actual power of the army is because a lot of people are going to have problems. Because when you mess up, you know what I mean?
But that isn't that a competitive player's like dream? Like a
Oh,
5 and
100%.
1
I love
player?
it.
Don't they want a codex that will inherently create artificially low win rates just because the
Oh,
skill cap
100%.
is higher, and then people just don't know how good they really are, and then
Yeah, you
GW just doesn't nerf it as bad.
keep losing with my army so I don't get nerfed. That's what I want to say. But I love it because it's high risk, high reward. It's not even high risk. It's some risk with a high reward. But if you mess up, you do get punished pretty badly. Just again, it's T3 guys with one wound. You mess up a movement, you get caught in the wrong place. You have a lot of tools for that now, but you can only make one unit ignore Overwatch, for instance. So like you have to go, who's the most valuable thing? Things of that nature. Because you can only
Yeah.
use the battle focuses on one unit
Are
except for
there
the plus one move.
are there any units in the Codex that you're necessarily not feeling right now? Like, what do you think of like Wraith Guard,
Wraith. I just didn't like
Wraith
the Wraiths.
Knights?
I think they did the Wraiths wrong. The Wraith host, I don't really like a ton. Somebody might prove me wrong. Obviously, this is me just seeing the codex, right away. This
Yeah.
is first take on it. I put it on the board and used them, but like the Wraith that you can't join, Spirit Seers can't join units anymore, and I think it's very difficult to make those units work when you're trying to keep an aura from a Spirit Seer. If you want Wraith Blades to work, somebody just says, "Hey, here's some jump pack intercessors." Dink. Hey, the Aquilans drop down and go, "Hey man, let's just shoot that dude in the head with a flamer." They're like, "Oh no,
Yeah.
I didn't like the Wraiths as much.
Flyers. Thoughts on the Flyers
I
and
hate flyers.
Yunari?
I've always hated flyers.
Yeah.
I don't like the flyer mechanic. I do think that the Crimson Hunter is a good flyer for what it is. The points are very good for it, so I think that's very valuable. I hate the flyer mechanic, but I think the Crimson Hunter is a very good model for what it is.
What about the way they work?
They made them right now. The rules aren't worded correctly for people getting in transports and stuff like that. And Yunari's always been a problem because you're bringing stuff from effectively 3 different factions onto that book. Harlequins look great.
Harlequins kind of needed
Yeah.
to come back into the game a little bit. So that
I
is
think they
great,
look really
actually.
good of loan up, and they've got some really cool mechanics. This is the one thing I really like. The Void Weaver, for instance, has loan up
What up?
18 inches by
Yeah.
itself, but they changed all of its guns. It used to have some long range guns. They changed all of its guns to be 24. So I really like its defensive early, but if you shoot it, you're effectively, people are going to be able to counter that.
Unless you use it in a way where you're killing
Killing
the
the
flank
flank,
off. So
exactly.
you're like
But that's
waiting
what I'm
for
saying.
it. You're
I feel
poking
like
with
that
the fig.
rewards, but then it rewards you for playing really well and making it so no one can have that angles on you. You make really good decisions with that, and you can be defensive.
Yeah.
And they've got
Yeah.
resurrection. They've got the Sisters Resurrection strat in Harlequins now. Excuse me, 1 CP. You just pick back up a guy. It's only once, once per model per character on that. But you put a Death Jester down who's got 12-inch regular loan up, put him on an objective, somebody gets close enough to kill him, 1 CP, boom, he's back there. You still get your 5 points. Cool.
Mhm.
You've got like a lot of shenanigans. I just like an army that has a lot of moving parts. I like that style of 40K. I don't want to just push stuff on top of you.
How am I noodling for 6s with this army?
You've got, again, if you want to noodle for 6s, you want to play Aspect Host because it's got sustained some of the stuff. I'm excited, man. I had a lot of fun. I played them today. So I really enjoyed them. I've been really looking into this codex. I think that there's a lot of different armies in the codex. And I think that's what a successful codex is.
Yeah.
Do you have
Yeah.
multiple ways you can play the game in one book? And I think that's in this book. I mean, I just took 3, full Harlequin build. Excellent. Windrider Host. Excellent. Also, the index chapter of the War Host is still super good. It has all the great strats it had before, and it gives plus movement in your battle focus. I actually don't know what's better right now for me in the army that I'm playing. Like if I played either War Host or Aspect Host, I would bring the exact same army, and it depends on which one I like. The strats are a little different,
Yeah.
and your base thing.
What do you think Eldar is going to do to the meta overall? Do you think it's going to shift, some of the top players? Are we going to see Space Marines kind of take a step back? Eldar has always been the bane of Space Marines historically.
The big thing is right now in the meta, there's a lot of armies. We talked about this last time we were talking about orcs. There's a ton of vehicles right now.
Yeah.
We've seen it in a lot of the very recent tournaments where you have tons of Vindicators, Dreadnoughts, Predator. You have just so much armor, Custodes, Dreads, things of that nature. Eldar, the Fire Dragons, for instance, plus they made Dark Reapers damage 3. That's a big change to them. So I think that Eldar is going to be a nice counter. I think that the Marines are still so powerful with their double oath, and then Bobby G out there with double oath. Marines will still continue to be a top tier army. I think that Eldar will join them.
I like that. I kind of agree so far. I haven't got the test game in like you, and I'm not as familiar with the meta, but I read the codex and I feel like I'm very excited. I'm very pumped. And I wanted to talk a little bit about my favorite Eldar theme. And I think this segment of the podcast is brought to you by
The 40K Lorecast. You can reach us at the 40klorecast.com. Listen, my friends, come in. Be serenaded by the soothing voice of Mr. Brad Chester.
I did listen to the Lorecast actually. I listened to a whole episode about a subject I kind of want to get to later, probably during Grind My Gears, and I like the episode. But my favorite story of Eldar, and I know I actually happen to know it's also your favorite, and it is the Exodites. I absolutely love the Exodites, and I think it's insane that GW never really kind of went for this.
Why do they
Because
not release models?
it is the coolest story ever. Eldar were literally able to create anything with machines that could just change matter.
They had psychic machines that changed reality for them.
Reality. They could do anything. So they got to a point where their civilization was so abundantly overdone in every possible way that there's just like giant lust parties everywhere.
And all that stuff.
This is how Slaanesh was born.
Well, they
and
had
started
entire
feasting on
groups.
their souls.
They had craft worlds, which were basically super OCD. The Eldar is OCD about everything, but one of the things the craft worlds made the craft worlds, and they left. But those are the Exodite Eldar. They went
to the Maiden Worlds, yes, which also are terraformed worlds by the Eldar. The Eldar terraformed these worlds all across the galaxy, and they made these worlds just breathtaking. So the Exodites leave and go to these planets prior to the fall so that they could just not deal with any of that lifestyle. And they're actually able to withstand because they left. They were unaffected by this. But here's the cool thing. They ride dinosaurs. So
dinosaurs with laser beams.
They literally like created these maiden worlds and created life on them. And in many of them, dinosaurs existed. And they went there and they basically, made them their pets. They ride. There's like literally like dinosaur lance riders,
dragon knights,
dragon knights. They're able to use the home world basically, like it's literally straight up Avatar. There's like home world crystals.
It's the world circuit. Yeah. They could get soul sucked by Slaanesh, but
correct.
For the Infinity Circuit, they do a world circuit, which is like this. It's Avatar basically.
It's straight up Avatar. So it's like imagine Eldar leave, become wood elves in the jungle, in the river banks, and start to ride dinosaurs
with lances on them.
Exactly. And like the opportunity here for modeling and converting and things is just amazing. If you haven't seen any of these, just go on Google, type in Eldar Exodites, go to the images section. You'll see this amazing conversion of this like T-Rex model with an Eldar guy on it. It's fantastic. So it's definitely my favorite theme of Eldar. I like a lot of Eldar themes. I love a lot of stuff Morgan Raw did. Like he's done
let's talk about how you got me with the one. I'm a huge hater of the flyer mechanic. And I sent Alan some lists over. We're talking about cool things. What could you do with Exodites? And he's like, what about a flyer? And he goes, but wait, Brad, what happens if I make that flyer a pterodactyl? And I go, well, maybe flyers aren't that bad after all.
No, I think you said, well, when you say that, yeah, of course we're going to have a pterodactyl. I want a pterodactyl. Like, so it was pretty sweet. I'm pretty pumped. I'm pretty excited. And yeah, I've always loved that theme so much. And I've always felt like, the closest they ever came was that Eldar Corsair bit with the scaled cape. Yeah, it's like a Drake cape. Yeah, it's really, really cool. I almost used it for like a salamander army, like chop it up from the old bits. I never got around to it, but yeah, it's a really cool cape. It's also probably not the right size for them. You'd have to find an STL file of it and scale it up. But yeah,
there's cool stuff. Speaking of that, we talked a little bit about 3D printing before.
We did.
And I
can't get on 3D printing until we announce our other sponsor of the day. And today we are sponsored by Redwood Empire, and we have a bottle here of their Screaming Titan. This is a weeded bourbon out of California. It is 96 proof, so it's on the lower end of proof, but it is amazing. Highly recommend them in general. The Screaming Titan is just one of their versions. They have several different types, and their labels are amazing. and they're
I
out of
was just going to
California.
say, I like that label's badass.
Oh yeah, the Screaming Titan is really nice. It's very cool stuff. And you get a lot of, with this one, it's a lot of nectarine, apple. You get a little bit of like a sweet tea kind of flavor. And since it's a low proof, it's something I can give my wife too, and she'll like it too, because she's not really into the 120, 130 proofs. So it's a little bit more palatable. And it's a great beginner bourbon for anyone who's interested in jumping in. So yeah, Screaming Titan, Redwood Empire. If you find a bottle of any Redwood Empire bourbons or rye, pick one up. They're fantastic. 3D printers, Brad.
I like the idea of conversions for one, because I can't see colors for shit. So I've always been a big fan of converted models more than I am of the best painted models. While I appreciate good painting, I like conversions quite a bit. Now I'm spoiled because I've got the Bits guy, Daryl Gamer.
Yeah.
So that's my home city store.
I would,
I always thought that everybody had that. But like, if you want a specific thing, it's weird because we were slowly starting to be everybody's cooler about 3D printed stuff. It was a big no-no for the longest time. But to make the coolest things, to get the proper bits to make that Exodite army that GW doesn't put out the models for, you have to have access to 3D printing. You just have to.
this brings me to something that has been grinding my gears for a
Oh,
I've hated the stigma on 3D printing since, 2019, 2018. I've been doing 3D prints back when it was expensive. When I started doing 3D printing, you weren't actually saving money. I got into it because of the conversion possibilities. I naively thought that I could become a sculptor and make my own stuff. I do edit things in Blender. I use some software, but the idea of sculpting just isn't in the cards for me, most likely. But 3D printing is a hobby. It is literally a hobby. It is an expensive hobby. Printers cost a lot of money. FEP sheets cost a lot of money. Build plates cost a lot of money. LCD screens break all the time. They cost a lot of money. It is a whole hobby of its own. Sure, you'll save money if you want to print a whole army. If you're trying to get conversions, if you're trying to get new bits, if you're trying to do kit bashes, and you're really looking for a cool new model to add flair to maybe a GW bit, maybe not a GW bit, maybe an AOS bit, maybe another bit from another army, I feel like that's a whole creative process that not get the respect it deserves, and still probably doesn't get the respect it deserves, because there are some people I think who abused it early on, and they came out with like, regular toys. They're just playing with nonsense. And that's not cool, right? I feel like what we should be doing is we should be looking at the intent behind the models. If the intent behind the models was to align with 40K storytelling, was to align with 40K theme and create a more cohesive, all encompassing experience where you're bringing in aspects of the theme, you're bringing in bits, and you're bringing in a new look, that's a really, really cool thing. That's like very artistic, in my opinion. Back in the day, conversions were huge. And now,
you had to have them.
yeah, and now you could see some really cool conversions with 3D printed models. People are like, oh, they're 3D printed. It's kind of the same thing with airbrushing. It's like you paint a model. And it's like, oh, did you airbrush that? So what? Who cares? I did a bunch of fine layers after. I highlighted it.
Some of the
Who
best
cares if the
painters
base layer is
have
highlighted?
mad skills now too with airbrushing.
No, airbrushing is fine. I don't even understand where the stigma was on airbrushing. I get it. If you just airbrush the models one color and then you airbrush their feet another color and you're like done, that's stupid. But that's not airbrushing. That's just an asshole, right? That's different, right? Like that's not the same thing.
That's just an asshole.
Yeah, that's different stuff. Like if someone puts effort into their models, I don't even really super care if they look great.
But I like
But
I think
the effort is
somebody's
really
really
important.
embracing the hobby in that, because whether you're the best painter, the best modeler, the best whatever, you took time and effort to put that army together, and that should be rewarded. Lauded, 100%.
That's exactly how I feel.
What you're gonna go to this year, though?
I'm going to your event.
That's right. June 6th and 7th at Southfield, Michigan, we are running the Motor City 40K Lorecast Major. And I am super pumped about it. It's the first one we're running, and I am unbelievably excited.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely going to be there, Brad. When do tickets go for sale?
They are for sale right now. Go
Okay,
to
cool. So
BCP or to the website.
I already have a ticket, right?
Look, man, times are tough. I got to charge you double, man. You're like, Brad, it looks like you charged me for Layla, Amela, and myself. I let you off free because your son got a free ticket.
As long as he got in, then we're on the same page. I'm really excited for that event and others. I was actually asking you, Brad, in the tournaments in general, for those wishing to compete in the ITC, what do you recommend are some of the key, US based events? Do you know off the top of your head, or is that something you'd have to look up?
Well, I'll get my gear on this. Some of the biggest,
Oh,
yeah, because team tournaments do not give you the points the singles tournaments do, and I hate that because team tournaments are the most fun way to play. I think they're very competitive because they give multiple strategic things that you don't have in a singles tournament. But in singles, one of the biggest things you're weighted. If you're looking for ITC points, the number of people and the number of rounds are the keys to getting, this is worth 200 points, this tournament's worth 300 points, whatever. Team tournaments, they only count the number of teams as opposed to the number of players. So when you're going to 8-man teams events, you have 50 teams with 400 players, it would only count as if it was a 50-man RTT.
they said, have they said that this is a limitation based on BCP software?
I think this is a thing that they've just done per choice. So,
oh wow,
no,
maybe it's the perspective of like good old boys club, like all the best players get together and it's not fair to other people.
I don't know. To be honest with you, though, but it's difficult. Team tournaments are very, very tough tournaments to win. Pairings. What kind of style, did you bring armies that complement each other that can go into that pairing situation? And then you also have to play well. You know what I mean? So
I mean,
there's
just
things.
coordinating you plus one person is a lot more work, right? Like literally you for sure, but just coordinating amongst a group of people, it already makes the event harder.
I don't think so. So, like in a team, like in a regular singles event, sometimes I play the whole event. I always play the event, but like if you lose a game and you can't win the event anymore because you had to be undefeated to go, it feels like, man, if I'm playing a team event with you, you lose a game. Good to hear. I'm gonna slap you in the face and go get your head back in here. We need to go. You need to play every round
Yeah.
for the team.
Yeah,
And I
yeah, yeah.
love
You got to get as many points as you possibly can.
full games
Yeah.
because that differential, every single point matters in teams. If you and I are playing and we figure out that you've got 100 and I'm going to get a 90, it doesn't matter. In a team event, it makes a big difference between you get a 95 and I get an 80. Even if you're winning big, I'm grinding to try to get 5 more points to get one more differential.
I've grinded at these team events to get from 99 to 100.
I'm going to give a story. The year that we won World Team Championships with USA, Spain.
Yeah.
Spain? Yeah, whatever. It was in Europe. I'll narrow it down to Europe. So my favorite game, so I went 5-1. To 5-1, 6-1, however many games we played, I lost one game. The only game I really remember was my loss. Not because oh man, I'm sad I lost, because I was grinding. I was playing a super bad match, and this is when we used to have random game length. I was tied at 5, game continued. 6, I had a small loss. On 7, I was trying my hardest to get 1 point. And
Yeah.
I 1 point. So me grinding out, in a game, normally you'd be like, whatever, you win. You know what I mean? I'm getting destroyed. Me trying to figure that 1 point won us that match. And that's one of my favorite memories. And that's, 6, 7 years, I don't know, some amount of years ago. And I love that really puts me into excitement.
I feel like that's always true though. We learn a lot from our mistakes, and we
Oh,
also
100%.
learn a lot from our wins that, might not be considered wins on paper, but are, I learned a ton. I have the story with that Tau Orc game where I just didn't move up past half the
Yeah.
board. And then the German player, remember when he found out what smasher guns were? That was a great game too. Like there's a lot of good games where, you're put in a position where, you're fighting an uphill battle. And you have to think on your feet, how are you going to potentially change this? I had one game where back when we got to place, Brad loves this. Back when we got to place objectives, whoever rolled
Allen
higher,
style
it
objectives.
was like 5 objectives. So I won the roll and I placed one objective in like the middle-ish area of the board. And then my opponent placed one like where he
tell them what you
was.
do. When you win the roll, you got to place 3, your opponent got to place 2.
Correct. So I get to place 3 and my opponent got to place 2. But I placed one sort of generally in the middle. And then he placed one sort of on his side of the board, right? Assuming that he would get that side for the deployment roll, but we haven't rolled for deployments yet. So he put one on his side. So I just put one on his side as well. And I triangled it. And then he got kind of confused. So then he put his again down somewhere near the middle again, because he was like trying to be like kind of safe. And then I put my last one also on his side. And I looked at Brad and I go, check it out. And he's like, you're an idiot. If you don't win that roll, what are you going to do? I'm like, I'm going to go over there and punch him in the face, metaphorically with my army, not in real life. And I rolled the dice and I win. And you could just see his soul left his body because I just sat on every objective. And I was like, turn 1, I'm done. He's like, you're not moving? No, I'm not moving. Just hiding. I have
I
4
love
objectives.
grinding. I love grinding those
Yeah.
games out when you have no business. You're on the wrong table against the wrong army in a bad mission.
Yeah.
And in a normal singles event, you'd be mad. You're like, I can't win or I'm going to get beat. You don't need to win in teams. You need to score as many points as possible.
I like the close ones where it's really close. It's like turn 3. It doesn't feel right. You feel a little bit like you're still uphill, even though it is close, and your opponent's kind of like, well, I think this game's over. I don't know if you want to call it. And if I get that on turn 3, like something turns on. I don't know what turns on, but something does turn on. Oh, yeah, you want to call it? Like, let's get in here. Let's figure this out, And then you just like, you start to like, it's like limitless. You're like just seeing all the moves that you're like, oh, boom, 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 boom. And you're like, I'm going to win by 1. And then like you get through the end, it's turn 5 and you roll it, see if the game goes on. Doesn't go on. You win by 1.
Yes, that was
Yeah,
wild.
you could get 7 turns in 40K.
Yes, you could.
How many games did you win because it went to 7? I feel like I
I'm gonna.
won more than I lost because it
I
went to 7.
I all I remember is sadness and 17s. Like
Oh, it
every
was
time
so good.
I
It
went
was
to
so
7,
much
it was
fun. I love that stuff. So for those who don't know,
it
on a
was
3 plus, you'd play turn 6, and then on a 4
4
plus, you'd
plus
play turn
3,
7.
7.
So
I
it
like
was
that though because you couldn't just do the shit we do right now, which is whoever goes second gets a free turn basically at the end of the
correct. You
game.
don't know. I thought
Because
it was a
back,
good.
back in the day, think about it
You
in
literally
old
cannot talk out
was a
bottom of
what's
5.
this so big? Because you just go, okay, you're going to move all your stuff out. Cool. If the game continues, I'm going to wipe your
Yeah.
army.
Yeah. Yeah. And I used to get so salty when I knew I was going to win, but because of
And the game didn't
time in the
continue.
tournament, that was the
Oh,
worst feeling ever. I knew I'm going to win. I have it all set up to win either turn 6 or turn 7, whatever it is. And because of time in the event, there's less than 10 minutes, so like don't start another round. And then my opponent would be like, oh, I guess we don't have time for another round. And I'd be like, dude, I'll play through lunch.
oh,
I'll
I
play through
hate
whatever.
that.
Let's go. I just need to move. And they're like, nah, it's done. I'm like, dude,
So
come on, man.
here's
Like
my
that
thing
was the
about
worst.
here's the thing right now, and I'll say this to now we don't have obviously random game length anymore, but if you don't play 5 turns, in when I say 5 turns, you basically run out of time in 5 turns. Because like a lot of armies are late game armies. A lot of people play late game. Hell, I play late game with a lot of things that I do. You're not getting a full game of 40K in, you know what I mean?
Those last turns where there's like way less stuff on the board and you have to decide, like, does this unit go that way or that
Real
way?
decisions.
And how do I figure out which one's the right choice? Like that's really where the game is won and lost. I hate the fact that some games can get away from you so much that like those turns don't really matter. That does kind of suck. I wish that I don't know if maybe players need to think about that differently or be a little bit more reserved in the way that they move up and they get into the fray. Just always think about resourcing, long term, like throughout the course of the game. You want to make sure you have stuff as the game goes on because that's really when you make some really clutch decisions.
The more resources you have, and you conserve your resources, the more threats you can give to your opponent. The threat of doing something is almost always better than the thing. If you give your opponent lots of questions, they will mess up some of the answers. But if you don't have the resources, you don't have enough units on the board to give people those questions, then you're not going to be able to. Especially when you give questions. This is one of my biggest things. When people just try to damage check people, you're asking a question, outmaneuver your opponent. That's why I like Eldar so much. I feel like you can outmaneuver your opponent, not
Yeah.
just your opponent.
Speedy dinosaur Eldar can get anywhere they need to get.
I love this stuff.
All right. Well, thanks, Brad. I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule of coaching and the lore podcast and testing out Eldar to get in a quick podcast with me today. That's all for today's chapter of the Chapter 416 podcast. I am Pajama Pants. That's Brad Chester.
This guy.
And we're out.